Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This episode, we have a Millionaire theme hour featuring Mike, a 42-year-old retired work optional pharmacist living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We discuss the highs and lows of his journey as he looks back, including how he felt trapped by big fixed expenses as a new graduate, why his early savings paid off big 20 years later, how his mindset shifted over time, why his real estate investing played an important role in his journey, ultimately replacing his pharmacist income, and why patience and short-term frugality and sacrifice were key ingredients to his success. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I have a hard truth for you to hear. Making a six-figure income is not a financial plan, and we'll hear that on today's episode. Yes, you've worked hard to get where you are. Yes, you're earning a good income, but have you ever wondered, am I on track to retire? How do I prioritize and fund all of these competing financial goals that I have? How do I plan financially for big upcoming life events and changes like moving, having a child, changing jobs, getting married, or retiring? And perhaps why am I not as far along financially at this point in my career as I thought I would be? The answer may be that your six-figure income is not a financial plan. Yes, as a pharmacist, you have an incredible tool in your toolbox, and that's your salary. But without a vision and an intentional plan, that good income will only go so far. That's in part why we started Your Financial Pharmacist back in 2015. At YFP, we support pharmacists at every stage of their career to take control of their finances, reach their financial goals, and build wealth through comprehensive fee-only financial planning and tax planning. Our team of certified financial planners and tax professionals work with pharmacists all across the United States and helps our clients set their future selves up for success while living a rich life today. You can learn more and book a free discovery call by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/learn. Again, that's yourfinancialpharmacist.com/learn. All right, let's jump into my interview with Mike. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
Before we jump into your financial journey and the path of becoming a seven-figure pharmacist, tell us more about your career in pharmacy. What led you into the profession? Where did you go to school? When did you graduate? And the type of work you've been doing since?
I think I started off like most folks going from high school to college. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I started there, and of course, I was thinking about medicine, dentistry,
Mm-hmm.
pharmacy as my options, and I was thinking about the path to get there. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. My life kind of hit a roadblock sophomore year. I have a condition called ulcerative colitis, and I had to drop out of school at that time. And for a semester, I was in the hospital for 16 days.
Mm.
And after the end of it and being in the hospital and experiencing things firsthand, I said, I think being a doctor is too hard for me. I think it's just not in the cards for what I have going on. And um, I didn't know at the time that this disease wouldn't be a huge part of my life. I
Mm.
found medicines over the years to control things, but I was also still dating my high school sweetheart at the time. And oddly enough, her father was a pharmacist. He owned an independent pharmacy. And I thought, why not? Um, so I finished my undergrad. I got a degree in economics and also a minor in engineering. And I went to pharmacy school from there.
And after graduation, those that are native to your area or where I lived for 10 plus years in Northeast Ohio, they'll recognize the name Giant Eagle, but others will not. So tell us more about the work that you've been doing with Giant Eagle after graduation.
Sure. So that was an exciting time to be in pharmacy school. I mean, you were going to school, you were learning things that were helping people and developing these skills. That it was very fulfilling. And the whole
Mm-hmm.
time, salaries were going up, and you would hear interesting things like the Alaska
Yeah.
deal and all the things you probably heard about at that
Yeah.
time. But I did graduate and I worked for Giant Eagle. I was an intern there, stayed on as a staff pharmacist. I had some experience leading 3 different stores, which I learned a ton from. And I was also a floater and then staff again. So
Mm-hmm.
it was about 20 years from the time that I signed on as an intern to last year when I did resign.
So Mike is a fellow 2008 grad. I graduated from Ohio Northern. I remember those times, right? It was the sign-on bonuses with the cars and classmates showing up with new cars in the parking lot, and the Alaska deal, which I never saw on paper, but I heard of it as well. So
Yeah.
we'll share with our listeners what is that all about. What I remember of it was a big retail pharmacy chain that was offering a 3-year deal in Alaska for $1 million. That's what I remember of the deal.
Well,
Uh,
the only thing I remember is sitting in class and hearing somebody turn around in their seat and say, "I heard
I
this,
heard.
$1 million, 3 years, I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to retire."
Yeah.
So maybe that planted the seed for some kind of
Yeah.
early retirement financial independence at that point.
Nonetheless, it's a very different time right here in
Right.
2024. So, we're going to dig into your current state of being a seven-figure pharmacist, achieving financial independence, getting to this point of being work optional. We'll talk about how you did that and how real estate and traditional investments played into that. But I want to go all the way back to 2008 when you graduated with a net worth of zero. Clean slate, no mounds of student loan debt, right? Our listeners today are graduating 150, 200, smaller debt loads. Some might look at that and say, hey, net worth is zero, graduation, smooth sailing, but not so fast, right? Tell us more.
Yeah. Before you throw tomatoes at the podcast, I did have a little bit of student debt, which it was, I mean, the difference between what I was making and what I was spending, I can't even remember how I paid it off. It was about 20,000.
Okay.
But I did go through a divorce, which cost some money, and I did have a real estate deal go south where I lost a lot of money. So I have had to dig myself out
Mm-hmm.
several times since 2008. But yes, I did graduate with roughly a clean slate, and worked my way up to now where my passive income through real estate
Mm-hmm.
pretty much replaces my salary at 30 hours a week as a pharmacist.
What were some of the decisions, and we'll dig deeper as we go throughout, but what were some of the decisions that you made early on as a new practitioner, as it relates to car purchases and other things? One of the things you shared with me prior to recording was that, quote, I became obnoxiously materialistic, which I partly blame for my marriage falling apart. What do you mean by that? And how did this ultimately, play into not only the financial plan, obviously the relationship, but what would be the beginning of that trench that you would eventually dig yourself out of?
So like we mentioned, it was exciting times to graduate with bonuses, and um, we I graduated and I was married. We got married the last year of school during rotations, and we were living in her parents' basement, not because we needed to financially, but because we weren't sure where we were going to end
Mm-hmm.
up for her job. But I bought an Audi, a luxurious Audi, while it wasn't even 3 months after I graduated, still living in my in-laws' basement, bought this fancy new car, and it just seemed like the thing I was supposed to do. Um, Long story short, I mean, we eventually moved. She got a job north of the city. We moved into a nice townhome rental. Not much longer after that, I'm on Zillow shopping for a nice big fancy house.
Mm-hmm.
So the fancy house came not much long after that. And I did become obnoxiously materialistic. And it wasn't long after I moved into that house where I saw the house on the next street. And I
Yeah.
said, gee, I wonder when or what it would take to get that bigger house. And
Mm-hmm.
that was just the way I was operating. And had we not gotten divorced, I could still be operating that way. But it was just a mindset where I blame being really materialistic 10%, 90%. We were young and
Sure.
ultimately not right for each other. But it wasn't much longer after living in that house a couple of years where the bomb went off, and
Mm-hmm.
divorced, trying to pick up the pieces again.
So you don't go from that point to becoming a seven-figure pharmacist by continuing that mindset and continuing those behaviors. So something shifted, something happened from a mindset and a behavior perspective. It sounds like that was the divorce. Tell us more about
It
what.
absolutely was. I
Okay.
realized that I didn't need a big house and a fancy car to be happy.
Mm.
I said the exact opposite. How little can I survive on, or how little can I have material wise in order to live a happy life? And I somehow found a studio apartment in the city. It was 350-ish square feet. When
Mm.
my mom first saw it the first time, took her breath away because it was just that small.
Mm-hmm.
The bedroom was in the kitchen,
Yep.
and those were happy times. I lived that way for a couple years, and it felt really comfortable, but I still wasn't
Mm-hmm.
saving.
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
couple years goes by, and I'm like, well, kind of on this path where my rent is relatively cheap, my salary is relatively high. Why don't I have a savings goal?
Mm.
Because I didn't feel like I was doing the right thing at the time. So my goal that year, I think this was about 2012.
Okay.
So a couple years after divorce, 4 years after graduating, I decided I wanted to save, in addition to 401k, I wanted to save $2,000 a
Mm.
month.
Mm-hmm.
And each month I would play the game. If I wanted to buy something, I worked extra. If it looked like I wasn't going to hit my goal, I cut back. Um, and that's what I did for that year, to, in addition to maxing out 401k, to build up some cash savings.
So if I'm following correctly, from Jump Street, you're maxing out your 401k, so you're leveraging the tax advantage account,
Hmm.
and then you hit this point shortly after the divorce, 4 years into your pharmacy career, you're in this studio apartment, 350 square feet, and you realize, hey, I've got an opportunity to more aggressively save, and so you set this target, which to be on, I mean, $2,000 is a percentage of one's take-home pay. That's a big chunk of money, and you see this a lot in the financial independence retire early, the fire community, where there's very aggressive savings rates, right? You're in your early 40s. So to get to a net worth of 7-figure plus, it's going to take a substantial amount of savings to do that at an early age. So did your savings rate stay there? What did the trajectory look like as you were building that over time?
So I hit that number.
Okay.
And I was able to save about $25,000 that year. So I built up my cash savings. After going through the divorce, I didn't have that cash savings, and I built that up. And again, I kind of felt comfortable. Like, hey, I hit that goal for that year, and I got a new apartment. That apartment had one bedroom. Not necessarily more happy in that apartment,
Mm-hmm.
but it was more expensive and it seemed nicer. So at that point, um, it was a little more rent, and I wasn't saving money. And about a year had gone by, and I said to myself, "What am I? What am I doing now?" I mean, I had this surplus, and I was on a good path. So I, for whatever reason, started Googling. I figured it was taxes. I typed into Google, single high earner, how to save on taxes. Okay,
Yeah.
so real estate comes up,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd always been interested in homes. I love home remodeling, and watching a little bit too much HGTV at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the next day, my friend came over to watch a football game. Oddly enough, he says, my mom is thinking about selling the duplex. I
Mm.
had known him in college, and my ears perked up because why not? So, long story short, I fell ass backwards into owning a duplex.
Little
And
house hack. Yeah.
house hack, yeah.
Yeah.
At the
How did
time,
that one work out? Tell us about that as an investment property.
complete. I mean, it was a huge learning curve. So I said yes. I contacted his mom. We did the whole thing without an agent. Um, it needed a lot of repairs, and the whole thing flooded while we were in
Oh.
escrow. The pipes burst. It was during winter. The heat wasn't on. So I had to jump into renovating, and immediately kind of learning how to increase the value of the
Mm-hmm.
property.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and I went from a studio apartment to half of a duplex. Even though it didn't have air conditioning, it felt. I mean, I felt amazing. I renovated it. It was nice, And I was just living in the duplex. I was charging downstairs rent that mostly covered my
Okay.
mortgage. And it was shortly after that time when I discovered Mr. Money Mustache. And I'm sure a lot of people that you've talked
Yeah.
to have started that or had that at some point in their journey. But that's
Yeah.
that's when things really started to um, go pretty quickly. And I'd love to talk about that experience.
Yeah, and we'll dive into that deeper, and we'll link in the show notes of Mr. Money Mustache for those that aren't already familiar. I suspect many people are. Great resource, great blog. We'll also link to other episodes where we talked about house hacking. For those that's a new term, the idea is that you typically lots of different ways to house hack, but the most common would be you live in a duplex, triplex, or quad. You live in one unit and you rent out the remaining units. Obviously, trying to generate income streams and hopefully cover a portion or a majority of your mortgage payment and turn your what you think of often separately, your primary residence and then investment properties, bundle those together. And there's some creative financing and strategies of ways that you can do that. And I want to come back in a little bit to talk more about real estate because I know it's been such a big part of your plan. I do want to go back to the savings rate piece because I know you started with that $2,000 a month goal. You shared with me in advance that eventually you were pushing that up closer to $4,000 to $5,000 a month. A lot of pharmacists hear these aggressive savings rates and they're like, "How?" Right? How? You think of a typical pharmacist income, take home pay 7 to 7,500, maybe $8,000 a month, depending on what they do. You look at large fixed costs like house, cars, student loan payments, daycare, childcare, other expenses. And we work with many pharmacists where there's just not a whole lot of margin, at least in current expenses. So give us a little bit more of the behind the scenes of how you were able to actually allocate a large percentage of your income. What sacrifices did that require? And then where were you putting that money? I heard early on it was cash savings beyond the 401k, but was that in IRAs? Was that in brokerage accounts? Where were you putting that money?
So I'm as far as stocks and retirement accounts, it's just 401k.
Okay.
The Roth and the traditional, just I was saving so much at the time, the income limits and the
Mm-hmm.
limit that you could put in just seemed too small for me. So how do you save? I mean, you mentioned it, the three biggest things: housing, transportation, and whether or not you have kids. I guess your third one would be food if you don't have kids. The third one, if you do, is daycare.
Yeah.
So house hacking, that's the big way to save on your housing costs.
Mm-hmm.
So at one point, my housing costs were zero because the rent went up. Um, and I was saving at that time. I'd paid off the loan on my car and I kept it. So a lot of folks will pay off one vehicle and buy the next, or keep buying new
Mm-hmm.
vehicles at a pretty frequent pace. But if you keep your vehicle 8, 9, 10 years, when you get to that point, it's paid off. You can save a lot of money. So I was saving probably in the realm of $5,000 a month.
Okay.
So that included a paid off vehicle. It included rent from downstairs, a little bit of overtime, manager's salary, um, and saving on food. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just not going out to eat a lot. That was a big thing for me. I mean, you can play the game where you get pretty extreme. And it was too much for me. I mean, there was one point where I was calculating the cost of the extra food I would have to consume to walk to work versus
Yeah.
the cost per mile of gas if I had driven. So what I was doing with that $5,000 a month, I was putting it all in my checking account at the
Okay.
time. It was just building up pretty quickly. I called the mortgage company and I said, "Hey, this PMI insurance, I have, a certain amount of equity at this point.
Yep.
Can we make that go away?" And they said no. And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, this is an FHA loan. It doesn't
Been
go
there.
away."
Did it.
Yeah, right.
Did it. On my
Something
first
that
home. Didn't
I,
know that.
I
Yep.
blame myself. I blame the mortgage seller, whatever.
Yep.
I was so angry by that. And I was saving so much money that I paid off, I think it was $100,000 loan
Mm-hmm.
balance relatively quickly, like within a year and a half,
Yep.
just because I was mad about that. And I
Yep.
wanted to make $120 a month go away. So I
Mm-hmm.
was putting it back into the real estate.
Got it. Okay. You mentioned something really interesting. You talked about extremes, right? And you see this sometimes in the fire community. And let's say out front, everyone's on their own journey. Everyone's situation is different. Everyone's cost of living expenses are different. Family situation is different. So everyone has to figure out what is the journey and pathway that allows them to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. But those that are on this financial independence, retire early or retire optional journey, there is what you call the potential for this frugal fatigue, right? And I love that
Yeah.
term because it's real. And there's this time and season for it, for the grind. And there's a fatigue that comes with that as well. And so, my question for you is, how did you combat this? When you recognized it, what did you do to say, hey, this is real and I'm achieving all these great goals and I'm saving a lot per month, but this fatigue is real? How did you combat that fatigue?
I mean, you have to be honest with yourself and say, what am I doing now? What is the result going to be?
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm saving so much that it's driving me crazy, the result is you're going to go crazy. Um, but I would, for me, it was adventure.
Mm,
So when I got pretty fatigued with the daily saving, and it wasn't like I was living this life where I was, things were relatively scarce and I wasn't having fun. But at time, like I bought an Airstream. When you're holding back so much and you're just kind of yearning for adventure, you
yeah.
see a commercial for the new Airstream that came out, you just buy it and you can adjust. I mean, just because you go down a path of a certain savings rate doesn't mean you have to stay there.
Yeah.
You can make adjustments. I ended up selling it a few years later, and the money that I lost, I guess you could say lost, was a great experience. So you just keep adjusting yourself, and you have honest conversations with you or with your spouse if you're married on, okay, what are we saving, what experiences aren't we having,
That's
and
right.
what is that going to result in the future, because you could have two different ends of the spectrum.
Hmm.
You could
That's
have
right.
YOLO, and I know people like this and they're happy. You only live once. They're spending their whole paycheck. They're not thinking too much about the future and holding back on some things. They're just living life now.
Hmm.
But there's the other end of the spectrum, which is deferred gratification.
Yep.
Either one of those two seems a little extreme, and you could get screwed either way.
Hmm.
So if you're YOLO and not saving anything and leveraging all your salary and income to have fun today, and you live to 100, I mean, you could be screwed. 65 when you start to not have the
Yep.
energy and ability to work. I mean,
Yep.
but if you defer everything and you die at 50, you're screwed as well. So you have to find your balance in the middle and continually be honest with yourself and have the conversations with your spouse on what the right balance is.
Ton of wisdom there, Mike. And there's several resources that are coming to mind that I feel like of what you shared, you're kind of pulling from, some different philosophies and putting it together. What we often say is, hey, we've got to figure out how we can save and invest for the future to take care of our future selves, but also live a rich life today. Both of those things can happen and be true, while that looks different for everyone. And, I'm thinking of some of the resources that have influenced my journey: Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Millionaire Next Door,
Sure.
Die with Zero by Bill
I
Perkins,
just read that.
Bigger Pockets. Like, I
Yeah.
kind of hear a little bit of pieces of these. And what I love is you've taken these teachings and probably many others and said, hey, this is what is ideal for me in my journey. And I think the way you articulated that is beautiful. And I want to talk more about the real estate. So 2012, you buy the duplex. Sounds like that was a good move in the house hack. You weren't a one and done real estate investor. 2019, you decide to do a deeper dive into real estate beyond that initial house hack, which ultimately, when we talk about current state, would allow you to cut back your work altogether to replace that income, but initially go from that full time to lesser full time, 30 hours a
Right.
week. Where did that motivation and drive come from to do that deeper dive in real estate? And tell us more about that second investment, the one that you kicked off in 2019.
So I had lived in the duplex for about 5 years, 2013 to 2018. I had gotten out of a 4-year relationship at the time, and I'm driving to visit my brother in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's a pretty long drive. So I'm doing a lot of podcast listening, and I
Mm.
discover some things about real estate. So again, I was kind of on the path, but I listened to some information on podcasts that said, well, you have another opportunity to continue down this path. I mean, I was still saving a bunch of money living there and earning a good salary. By the end of that trip, I decided that I wanted to buy another property.
Mm.
I wanted to continue. There was no reason not to grow this. And at that time, I felt like I had a little more tools and resources and experience to go down that road. So I bought another house. I was able to buy it cash without a loan because of my savings rate,
Mm-hmm.
over those last 5 years. And I lived in it, renovated it. I rented it out for a decent price, and I hit a certain number that I wanted to hit, and I thought I was the king of real estate in Pittsburgh. And so I bought another one, and before I was finished with that one, and it ultimately ended up in another low point in my life where I just had too much going on.
Mm.
Um, and I ended up selling that for a loss because it was just too overwhelming. But I, these are the things you think about on long car rides and long bike rides. It's like,
Yeah.
what is the purpose of what I'm doing?
Yes.
And I had said to myself, I have this duplex. It has the opportunity to give me 2 rents.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the opportunity, because nothing's really tying me down, to buy more real estate. And I think in order to do that, I need to cut back hours. So eventually I asked to be cut down to 30. I got a really great store where I worked 3 days a week, every fifth weekend. So
Oh,
that's what gave me
nice.
the time
Mm-hmm.
and the freedom to eventually build more real estate. And the salary that I've lost over that amount of time, um, it's really not a big deal, because what you're able to build with your time, or
Mm-hmm.
the freedom that you're able to have, is worth the cost.
So, in terms of your portfolio, you started with the duplex. You buy another one in 2019. Sounds like that goes well. The
Mm-hmm.
one after that, not so much. You mentioned a low point. What did you do to kind of pick yourself back up and say, "Hey, maybe I'm not the king of real estate in Pittsburgh, but I also have something here to offer, and I think I'm onto something in terms of building some real assets here." How did you get out of that trough and really get yourself back in the game?
I mean, thank God I met my wife at that time, because she gave me the confidence and believed in me. And
Mm.
I'm the type of person that if someone believes I can do something, I could climb a mountain pretty
Hmm.
easily. Amazing, amazing luck that I found such an amazing person. And she believed, she knew what I had done in the past with the single family home and the duplex, and the skills that I had built and the
Hmm.
knowledge that I had built during this time. And sometimes all you need is a partner that can believe in you and do it with you.
Hmm.
So we basically went on a buying spree and used the equity in those 2 homes to buy 4 more homes
Okay.
and rent those out.
Okay.
And that's what our portfolio looks like today: 4 single families and a duplex, plus
Okay.
our primary house.
And then that portfolio, the current day portfolio you just mentioned, has gotten to the point where work is optional. So you went from 40 hours a week to 30 hours a week, and now that portfolio is generating income such that if you need to want to work in the future, great, you can, or if you want to pick up extra hours, but you're not in a position of needing that income.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. Congratulations on the journey and
Yeah. And
and
we,
all the work.
yeah. So that was a goal. And things change when you have kids. I mean, we had 2 children born pretty close together, and we were coming towards the end of my wife's maternity leave for our second child, and we were
Mm.
deciding what to do. And it was a decision for me to stay home and not work.
Mm-hmm.
And the investing in assets and growing those assets and having those assets give you a return to buy more
Yeah.
is what allowed us to have a one income family.
And your boys are how old now?
They're 1 and 2.
All right. All right.
So
So you got options for time and flexibility to schedule with them.
yeah,
That's cool. If we zoom out for a moment and look at your pathway to becoming a seven-figure pharmacist and now looking at your asset base as a whole, not specific numbers, but just general percentages. If you were to break that down between, more traditional, right, 401k types of dollars versus the assets that you have in real estate or potentially others that I'm not yet aware of, like how is that net worth broken down?
I would say 60 to 70% real estate, probably 60% real estate, and then the rest is in 401k.
Okay. Okay. And we haven't even touched on obviously a whole nother aspect of the real estate. You've got your cash flow you're generating now, there's future appreciation, there's tax advantages.
Yeah,
If anyone wants to dive into that deeper, Tax-Free Wealth by Tom Wheelwright, great resource to kind
yeah.
of just open your eyes a little bit if that's not something you've considered before. So
I mean, for our real estate specifically, I mean, if you think about it, there's three or four different ways where you make money. So there's cash flow, there's appreciation, and there's loan pay down.
mm-hmm.
So what we shoot for with our properties is $1,500 a month. 500 is 4 or 500 is cash flow. 500 is being paid down by the tenant, and then about
Okay.
$500 is appreciating. And when you multiply that by several properties,
Yep.
you get that automatic savings in those two parts. You get the automatic savings where the tenant's paying it down and it's appreciating in value.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can use the cash flow to either reinvest, or if it's a different season of your life where you need to live on cash flow, you can do that. You can take a break from work. You can take a sabbatical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it just provides you options. And right now, what I'm looking at is what kind of options has what I've built in the past giving me to live a great life with my
Yeah.
family. Like you mentioned, the book Die with Zero. You get to 40 years old and you start thinking, okay, I have this money saved because I was diligent in being able to
Mm-hmm.
save. What does the next 10 years look like? Am
Yep.
I going to sacrifice weekends with my family and nights in order to have 1 or 2 extra $1 million? I maybe your kids and your spouse, they want you home
Yep.
so that you can live a different life with experiences. And that's something that you think about when you turn
Mm-hmm.
a certain age and you start wondering, how much more do I really need to be comfortable after 65? I don't want to be self-insuring myself.
Mm-hmm.
If maybe there's an insurance product or an annuity that you can buy that would serve that same purpose.
Yeah, and options is the word I hear. Flexibility is the word I hear. And it's interesting when I've told our community about the idea of financial independence, whether or not they want to retire early. Some people love what they're doing, some people don't like what they're doing, some people might want part-time or to pivot. But the goal of financial independence, I think, is one that resonates with people as a whole. And when I ask that question, what excites you? What motivates you around that concept of financial independence? It's options, it's
Right.
flexibility, it's being able to choose and to have choice in those things along the way, which I think your story is such a good example of that as well. Mike, when you look back on this journey, and one of the things I appreciate is in the transparency and the vulnerability, you know, we could look at the current state and say Mike is crushing it, and you've done incredibly well. But there's been highs and there's been lows along the way, and there's been a lot of learning that's happened. As you look back on that journey from net worth of zero to becoming, well into a seven-figure pharmacist, what lessons do you take away as you reflect back on that you can share with our listeners?
I think a good lesson to learn is have honest conversations with yourself about the alternatives. So if you're on the path and you're making and not saving, if you're making a certain amount and you're not saving a whole lot, and you get to the point where maybe you're thinking there's something more I can do. Maybe I can save a little bit more, or maybe I can make investments outside of my 401k that are going to be a good return and give me cash flow, like real estate. Just have honest conversation about what the alternative is. Because sometimes the alternative is you get stuck for a long period of time in what you're doing because you didn't take those 5 years to save diligently or to pursue something that you're interested in as far as a side hustle or take that job. So I sit down, evaluate what you're doing and what path you're on and where that's going to lead to 10, 20, 30 years down the road, 5 or 10, whatever.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of patience in your story. I hear a lot of, seasons of sacrifice, but also seasons of perspective and kind of reevaluating, where am I going? What are we trying to do? I'm curious, as you look out, you mentioned this time window in the future, as you look out, where do you see your real estate portfolio going, now that it's gotten to a point of replacing your income? Do you see yourself kind of staying put in this model where you've got a duplex and several single family homes? Do you see an expansion within that same investment category? Are you interested in, commercial or short-term rentals? Like
Yeah.
where are you envisioning the future of the real estate portfolio?
So I'm envisioning, my vision is to work on it 3 to 4 hours a day from a coffee shop and manage the investments. So I wish I could give you a better answer. And part of stepping back from the pharmacy job and trying new things is this level of uncertainty and action and really uncomfortability. Like things aren't amazingly comfortable right now. I've really had to unwind some of the programming that 20 years of retail pharmacy put in me. So it's tough, and I can't tell you exactly where I want to be. And this is a period where I am searching. But I mentioned the word sabbatical. So it's a period of time where you're not forced to work, where thank God my wife is just so amazing and understanding. You can take the time to figure out your next path.
Yeah.
And instead of working nights and weekends for the next 10 years, you figure out how to have your kids experience and watch you live an amazing life. So that's an evolving thing. And maybe we'll catch up in 5 years and I can tell you what it evolved into.
Yep.
But you really have to think about what your passion and purpose is. And sometimes you look at 100 jobs on LinkedIn or Indeed, pharmacy, medical related, and you can't see yourself doing that. So I'm trying to find my passion and purpose right now. And I really think it is in real estate, whether it's rental real estate, commercial, vacation rental, or flipping. I'm trying to figure that out. So.
Yeah. And what excites me about that is I sense this is a season of, some of that deep reflection and figuring out the next steps. You use the word sabbatical as well, but another tip of the cap to the work that you've done. You've put yourself in a financial position with the support of your family to be able to take the space to think and think strategically, right? And that's an amazing opportunity, but it didn't fall in your lap. You worked incredibly hard for that to happen. So congratulations, Mike, on the journey. I do look forward to following up and following your journey along the way. I know it's been an inspiration to me. I'm sure it will to our listeners as well. So thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.